What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto realizes his potential Tsunade bashing? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. The sky was painted a sullen gray, and the rain poured down upon the earth. The wind howled and the trees swayed fiercely. A figure lay on the bank by the water, clothes torn, body battered and bruised, a large wound on its torso seeping blood. Tired eyes stared up at the dull sky, uncaring of the feel of the rain against them. In the background, across from the water, a shadow stumbled its way into the forestry, clutching its side. The figure by the bank finally began losing its battle with unconsciousness. "I can't die here," it thought. "I'm an Uzumaki," before sleep made its claim. The last thing the figure heard was the soft sound of approaching footsteps. Naruto awoke with a start and blinked at his surroundings. White. Everything's white, he thought to himself before mentally groaning. White only meant one thing. The hospital. God, how he hated the hospital. It reminded him of too many forcefully forgotten memories of darker times. Looking down at himself, he saw most of his body was covered in bandages. His brow scrunched in thought, seemingly trying to remember just what could have caused him such injuries. Sasuke, and suddenly it all came flooding back to him. Hearing the news that Sasuke had run away, Tsunade Ba-chan giving him the mission, his promise to Sakura and the fight with Sasuke. His face etched itself into a frown upon the realization that he hadn't been able to fulfill his promise. Some ninja he was, couldn't even follow his own nindo that he assigned himself. It was all quite ironic, he concluded, chuckling humorlessly to himself. As soon as he had finally started to make progress in earning his friendship with both Sasuke and Sakura, everything fucked up. Sasuke had tried to kill him in search for power, and Sakura would most likely hate him not being able to bring the latter back. He was back to square one. His thoughts were interrupted, however, as the door to his room opened. "Ah, brat, was wondering when you were gonna wake up." Naruto looked up to see one of the most recent people who happened to make their way onto his list of precious people. Tsunade of the Sannin. "Yeah, nice to see you too, Granny." Naruto mumbled, not particularly in the mood for banter. Tsunade frowned, wondering why the normally loud and hyper Naruto was being so quiet and withdrawn. "What's eating you?" Tsunade questioned, concern riddling her face. Naruto opened his mouth to speak before closing it and looking down at his hands, mumbling something. "What's that? I didn't hear you speak up." The slug Sannin remarked, irritation quickly bubbling within her. "I said, why's it always so hard?" Naruto near shouted. Surprise overcame the Sannin as she comprehended his words. "What do you mean, brat, what's hard?" she asked in a soft tone, adopting a grandmotherly voice. "Life. Everything. Why is it always me that seems to come out of these things the loser? All I do is try to earn people's respect and show them that I'm not some demon, some brain-dead prankster or the dead last. I give everything I have for those around me. And what do I get? Nothing." At this point, tears began making their way down Naruto's face, as Tsunade's surprise morphed to sadness and sympathy. "I mean, even when I protected the village against Gaara when Sasuke couldn't and Sakura was injured, no one even thanked me. I didn't even get the credit. Sakura thanked Sasuke immediately after she woke up and refused to believe I could have done such a thing. Shit, the whole village didn't believe I did it, except the ones that saw me." Tsunade inwardly frowned, rubbing Naruto's shoulder for support, thinking what she could say to make her adoptive grandson act himself again. A soft smile crept its way across her face. "You know," she began, drawing Naruto's attention from his hands on his lap to look into his eyes, "your Ka-san would be crazy proud of you." Naruto's gasped at the mention of his mother, all previous thoughts forgotten. She was always headstrong. Believed in action over words. Much like you in that respect. In fact, you two are so alike personality-wise it's almost scary. She had the same fiendish love ramen that you have too. Tsunade joked, earning a soft laugh from Naruto. She smiled at finally having rid him of some the pain. "You knew my Ka-chan?" Naruto questioned in a shaky voice. The word felt foreign rolling of his tongue, yet nice at the same time. The Sannin simply nodded in response. "Yes," she replied, her name was Kushina Uzumaki. She was beautiful. She had long fiery red hair, fair skin and a mean temper so great she was nicknamed for it, the red hot-blooded habanero, if I recall correctly. Tsunade said, giggling to herself. Naruto sat back in his bed, a small smile on his face. Thinking about his newly discovered Ka-chan, she loved you lots too. Naruto's attention was once again snapped back to the medic. I remember when she was pregnant. All she would do was talk about the things she would teach you, how she would dress you, and what a great ninja you'd be. I'd never seen her that happy before. She loved you so much that she gave her life to protect you during the Kyuubi attack. Tears resurfaced as Naruto again began crying, but he didn't mind showing this weakness. Very rarely in Naruto's lifetime had he shed tears of joy. Actually, Tsunade pondered, adopting a thinking pose. Now that I think about it, it's not so unruly that you call me your Ba-chan. Naruto gazed at her quizzically with slightly red and puffy eyes, prompting her to continue. Well, my grandmother was called Mito Uzumaki, and I'm pretty sure Mito Ba-sama was Kushina's great aunt, so I guess that makes me your great auntie or something like that. She concluded nonchalantly. What? So does that mean? Naruto began before trailing off. Yeah, I guess I've got some family left in this world after all, and you've got some you never knew you had. Before she could blink, a blonde blur crashed into her. Soft sounds were heard as she looked down at the bandaged Jinchuriki. She wrapped her arms gently around his injured body and rested her chin against his head. A single tear rolling down her cheek. Now Naruto-kun, there's no need for that, she whispered gently. Naruto withdrew slightly before meeting her gaze. That's no way a future Hokage should act. After all, you are going to be the one who takes the hat from me, and I can't be waiting forever. The Sannin joked, earning a wide grin from Naruto. You bet, Ba-chan. I'll be sat in that chair before you know it, he exclaimed, through a wet and snotty smile. The slug Sannin laughed kindly, earning Naruto's smile to widen, stretching his whiskered cheeks. I'm sure you will, Gaki, she smiled, drawing the blonde back into her embrace. I'm sure you will. Unknown to the two blondes, a figure stood by the window in the door, smiled to themselves, before walking away. Not wanting to interrupt the tender moment between two reunited family members. Naruto couldn't remember the last time he'd been so happy. Maybe when he became Genin. Nah, that still didn't compare to this. He just found out who his Ka-chan was. After Tsunade and his moment together, she had gone on to inform him that Naruto's Ka-chan had come to Konoha from Uzushiogakure and was a member of the Uzumaki clan. That last bit of information had made Naruto's happiness double. Not only had he had a Ka-chan who loved him, but also belonged to a powerful clan. The only downer on the whole thing was that his clan had all but died out, the few members that may be alive spread across the 5 great nations. Also, the Sannin refused to tell Naruto who his Otoyu-chan was, said something like, he was very strong and made many enemies during the war, it wouldn't be safe if word got out. Yeah, like he hadn't heard that before. Naruto was currently on his way to the Hokage Tower, thinking of his time in the hospital. He had been surprised to find that many people came to visit. Kakashi was the first to visit, however all he really did after his ICHA book. Next, the whole of Team 8 came along, Kiba having just got out of hospital himself. Shikamaru and Ino had also visited along with their sensei Asuma. Choji, still being bedridden, didn't come. More surprisingly, however, was Sakura, who came to visit. Naruto smiled at the memory. Flashback. A knock on the door drew Naruto's attention away from the window he had been gazing through. Come in, he said. The door opened slowly and Naruto's eyes widened at the sight of pink hair. Sakura-chan? He questioned amiably. Sakura, however, didn't respond. Instead, she walked right up next to the bed, head lowered, hiding her eyes. Sakura, I'm sorry, Naruto began, his head lowered. I failed to bring Sasuke back. You must hate me now, he said in a solemn tone. Sakura didn't respond, adding to Naruto's worry. He opened his mouth to speak again, however was interrupted when a fist met his head, followed by a loud shout of, Baka. OW. Sakura, what the hell, I'm injured here. Naruto protested angrily, but the only response he received was a bone-crushing hug from his childhood crush, causing his cheeks to redden slightly. You Baka, Sakura retorted quietly. I know I asked you to bring back Sasuke, but I didn't want you to nearly get yourself killed doing so. Naruto's eyes widened dramatically upon hearing those words. I don't care that you weren't able to bring him back. It's okay, Naruto-kun. She withdrew from their embrace and gazed at the starry-eyed Naruto, unshed tears forming in her eyes. I heard from Tsunade-sama what Sasuke and the Sound 4 did to you and the others. How you were all so nearly killed. And I just want to say I'm sorry. Tears now began rolling down her cheeks. At first when I heard that you hadn't been able to bring him back I was so angry that you'd lost Sasuke. But after hearing about how he acted, and how far you went only to get so badly injured I couldn't stay angry. I'm sorry Naruto-kun. She finished before drawing him into another hug. I'm so sorry. Sakura-chan, Naruto said, earning no response from the weeping Kunoichi. Sakura-chan. He repeated, a little more assertively, still earning no response. Sakura, he near shouted, holding her out by the shoulders at arm's length. He looked her over and smiled sadly, seeing the obvious pain this was causing her. I said I would bring Sasuke back. No, I promised I'd bring him back. So I will. I don't know how long it'll take. But I'll get strong to drag that duck butt-haired emo back to Konoha screaming if I have to, whether he likes it or not. Whether he's our friend or foe. And that's a promise of a lifetime. He finished with a determined stare. Sakura laughed slightly. Hi Naruto-kun. I suppose it is. She smiled kindly, before hitting him over the head again. Ow Sakura-chan, why are you hitting me now? Naruto whined, clutching his head. You really must be a doby if you think I'm gonna let you go after Sasuke alone after all that's happened. Naruto, I swear to you that I'll share the burden of bringing Sasuke back. And that's my promise of a lifetime, she concluded, fire burning in her eyes causing Naruto to smile. A small, true smile. Hi Sakura-chan, I suppose it is. Flashback end. Sakura had gone on to inform Naruto that Tsunade-ba-chan was going to take her in as an apprentice to learn medical ninjutsu along with Shizune. Naruto blinked at the realization that he'd already reached the Hokage's office. Geez, I didn't even realize I'd entered the tower, he thought, before shrugging and pushing open the grand doors to the room. Mornin', ba-chan, Naruto greeted, a large grin plastered on his face. The Sannin, who was sat at her desk, looked up smiling fondly. Ah, Naruto-kun, just the person I wanted to see, she said in a grandmotherly tone. Ever since their encounter at the hospital, the medic didn't mind Naruto calling her ba-chan as much. In fact, she liked it. It reminded her that she wasn't alone anymore. Not that she'd tell anyone that though. So ba-chan, what you got for me? Tsunade made an ah noise before shuffling through the drawers in her desk in search for something. Aha, here they are, she exclaimed before slamming 3 scrolls onto the table, one with the kanji for Ken, the other for Fuin and the last for Chakra, all with the Uzumaki swirl on them. What are these ba-chan? Naruto questioned, gazing at the scrolls, brows furrowed. These gaki are scrolls containing Uzumaki techniques. In fact, these 3 styles of techniques are pretty much what made the Uzumaki so feared during their time. She informed the young blonde, smiling at his intrigue. What techniques are they? Naruto interrogated further, his excitement akin to a child in a candy shop. Tsunade laughed at his enthusiasm. The first contains instructions for Uzumaki-style Kenjutsu. There are 3 different styles that you can choose from, I believe. Only one, however, will suit you. The Uzumakis were always one to embrace diversity, such as demonstrated in their variety of techniques. Naruto stared on wide-eyed, earning another giggle from the great medic. This next scroll contains Uzumaki Fuinjutsu or sealing techniques. Sealing is the main reason that made the Uzumaki so powerful, as they had an uncanny way of integrating seals into offensive and defensive combat techniques. Tsunade paused to glance up in Naruto's direction to gaze his reaction, only to sweat drop at the sight of his blatant confusion. Choosing to ignore it and let a certain perverted hermit explain later, she continues. And this final scroll contains information regarding a form of chakra manipulation, specific to the Uzumaki. Now this immediately piqued Naruto's interest. What, like a bloodline ba-chan? Naruto excitedly questioned. Sort of, the Sannin answered. Don't get your hopes up though. Even amongst the Uzumaki this form of manipulation was very rare. Although, your Ka-san was able to do it, so who knows? Maybe you'll get lucky? She finished, smiling cheerily at Naruto's frown, which was soon disregarded and replaced with a wide grin. That doesn't matter ba-chan, I've still got all the other stuff to learn, Naruto consoled loudly. Haha, I suppose that's true Naruto-kun, but remember you still have a lot of other tricks and techniques to learn outside of these Uzumaki ones. Try not to get tunnel vision, eh? Tsunade reprimanded gently. Hi Ba-chan, but I'm still gonna learn every technique in these scrolls and become the strongest Uzumaki there ever was and rebuild my clan. Naruto declared with gusto, earning a raised eyebrow and a smirk from his grandmother figure. Is that so, Naruto-kun, and whatever happened to becoming the greatest Hokage of all time? She questioned jokingly. That'll come right after I become strong enough using these techniques to protect everyone in the village. He quipped, not missing a beat. Yosh, I better get to it. Naruto exclaimed before rushing forward and sweeping up the scrolls and rushing to the door. Turning around he grinned at the blonde Hokage. Don't get too comfy in that chair Ba-chan, cause I'll be kicking you out of it before you can say great-grandkids. He joked, causing Tsunade to blush and splutter at her fantasies of little great-grandkids to spoil being caught out. See ya later Ba-chan, Naruto said as he exited the office, bringing the Sannin out of her thoughts. As she stared at the door a soft smile graced her face and she spun in her chair to gaze out over the village. That kid, she laughed to herself, he's going places, and I'll be there every step of the way. As Naruto walked through the streets of Konoha, he noticed a slight change in the looks sent his way. While the majority still glared, a few, mostly shinobi, offered appreciative nods his way. Although a small difference, it added to Naruto's high spirits. Naruto was currently on his way to the village gates. After he'd received the jutsu scrolls from Tsunade, he'd bumped into Jiraiya, who told him they'd be going on a training trip which had elated the young blonde to no end. However, he'd also found out that he'd be gone for 3 years. That bit of information hadn't exactly thrilled him, but considering the amount of training he needed to do, he decided it was acceptable. Turning the corner, Naruto's eyebrows shot up at the sight of the large gathering of people waiting at the gates. There was the whole of Team 8 and 10, Sakura and Kakashi-sensei were also there. Tsunade and Shizune stood closest to the gate, the latter looking slightly disgruntled at having to ward off a pervy-looking Jiraiya. Team Guy had also turned up and stood slightly apart from the rest of the group, a tired-looking Tenten standing guard between an excitable Lee and a bored Neji. As Naruto got closer, the group's attention was drawn towards the young blonde. "Mornin' everyone," Naruto shouted happily. Naruto, you're too loud for this time of morning," Shikamaru drawled in a bored tone, followed by a troublesome blonde comment, upon getting an angry cry from Naruto, earning him a knock on the head from Ino. The Jinchuriki weaved his way through the crowd and approached the two Sannin and Shizune. "Yo Aro Sannin, Ba-chan, Shizune Ne-chan," Naruto greeted, ignoring the throbbing veins that appeared on both the Sannin's foreheads and grinning at the small smile on Shizune's face. "Bloody brat," the toad sage mumbled to himself. "Anyways, you ready to go?" he questioned. "Yep, got everything I need right here," Naruto exclaimed, his thumb pointing to his backpack. "Probably filled with cup ramen," a certain Nara commented from behind, earning a chorus of laughs much to the young blonde's displeasure. Moving on, Tsunade began, clearing her throat. "You two should probably get going," she said, a slight waver in her voice. "Hi," Naruto responded, in an excited tone but with the same waver his adoptive grandmother had. One by one, each member of the Konoha 12 minus Sasuke came up to bid Naruto the best of luck. Team 10 had offered Naruto a small traveling pack of assorted foods, courteous of Choji. Team 8's a goodbye and abruptly short, Kiba having done the majority of the talking and an extortionately shy Hinata handing over a small container of healing ointment, to which Naruto was grateful for and praised her, causing the young Hyuga to pass out. Team Guy's parting words had also been short, Tenten and Neji having to drag Lee away as his shouts of youth became a slight bit overbearing. Kakashi put away his book to wish Naruto farewell and gave a few words of wisdom, something along the lines, "Treasure your time training with the world's most amazing author," to which Naruto's sweat dropped and then laughed, embarrassed. Next Sakura approached Naruto slowly, her head lowered. "Sakura-chan?" Naruto questioned. She proceeded to walk towards the young blonde before embracing him gently. "Be careful Naruto-kun," she whispered, before withdrawing and giving him a death glare, "and I swear to Kami if you come back a pervert I'll personally castrate you." Sakura threatened menacingly, causing shivers to run up the spines of every male present, and a subsequent sweat drop from Jiraiya. "She's just like Tsunade," he thought to himself worriedly. "Right brat, we should be off." Jiraiya stated, after shaking himself from his thoughts and beginning down the path out of Konoha. Hi, Naruto replied, before following the sage. Naruto-kun. Naruto spun on his heels to find a teary Tsunade with a small, kind smile on her face. She walked up to him and bent over at the waist so she could speak to him at eye level, causing the young blonde blush as she unknowingly gave him a prime view of her cleavage. What's up, Ba-chan? He stuttered, earning a knowing grin from Jiraiya. You stay safe, you hear me, Naruto, and you better come back strong too, she smirked. Can't have the future Hokage being a weakling, can we? Tsunade joked. Naruto smiled at the running joke between them. Naruto's expression turned to shock, however, as the medic leaned down further and kissed him on the forehead. Now run along, Naruto-kun, I'll see you in 3 years. She said, standing up straight and walking back to the crowd, ignoring the shocked, and some jealous, faces of the other ninja. Why Yash, see ya, Naruto said, having cleared his mind, waving to the group before running off to catch up with the old sage. This is gonna be the best training trip ever. He cheered to himself merrily. Oh, how he was in for a shock. 6 months later. This training trip sucks. A very unhappy Naruto grumbled as he walked through the dark streets of a small village near Wave Country. To say Naruto was unimpressed with his new sensei thus far would be an understatement. All they'd done since leaving Konoha was make their way from village to village, Jiraiya assigning Naruto chakra control exercises to do while he went off whoring. Bloody arrow Sanin, Naruto thought to himself despondently. The only consolation to the whole thing was that he had the jutsu scrolls Tsunade had given him, but without proper instruction he hadn't gotten far. Plus he didn't even have a sword to practice the kenjutsu with. Looking up, Naruto noticed a small ramen stand. Smiling at his discovery, he strutted over the little restaurant. Trust ramen to save the day, he thought to himself merrily. Oi Asen, give me 2 large misos. Naruto exclaimed as he moved under the flap. Yash, coming right up, the stand owner replied, turning around briefly to flash Naruto a grin. Naruto paused momentarily, eyeing the man cautiously. He looked suspiciously like Tuchi Oja-san. Naruto was brought out of his thoughts as 2 people sat down at the other end of the stand. Did you hear about that fisherman the other day? The first man questioned. He had a mop of brown hair and a rugged face. No, what the hell you on about? The second asked. He too had messy brown hair, however his was cut shorter and he had a younger, slimmer face. Well, I heard he was out on a trip and got too close to those whirlpools surrounding the old Uzumaki ruins. The man began, leaning closer. Ooh, that's never a good thing, the other declared dramatically, throwing his head back. Yep, just goes to show. Reelin' in a good catch ain't worth your life, the first stated, followed by a sage-like nod from the second man. Meanwhile, Naruto's mind was working at a mile a minute. He was near his ancestral home. He had an ancestral home. He knew that his clan had been all but wiped out, but he'd never thought of their origins, their old home. Buzzing with excitement, Naruto vacuumed up the rest of his ramen and paid the stand owner before shooting him to find Arrow Sanin to tell him of his discovery before stopping mid-sprint. Even if I do find the old perv, he'll probably be with some girls and tell me to get lost. And he might not even want to go out to some ruins because there won't be any girls out there. Naruto mentally considered conclusively. Bah. Screw him, I'll go without him. Naruto declared out loud, earning odd glances from people passing by. Alright, first things first, where the hell is Uzumaki? The young Jinchuriki questioned to himself. I know, I'll go ask those guys at the stand. He cried out loud before dashing off back to the stand. Upon reaching the small restaurant, Naruto was relieved to find the men still sitting eating their ramen. Oi Asens, Naruto shouted, causing the 2 men to swivel on their seats. Whatcha want Gaki, we're eating here. The older of the 2 answered, the younger nodding in agreement. Do you guys know where Uzumaki is? The young blonde questioned loudly. Yeah, the older of the 2 again responded. What's it to you, huh? Yeah, what's it to you? The younger one echoed, earning an annoyed glance from his elder. I wanna go there, Naruto exclaimed, causing the 2 men to pause and look at each other briefly before bursting out laughing. Ha ha, you wanna all go to Uzu? Oh man, that's the funniest thing I've heard in ages. The older one laughed, ignoring the disgruntled expression on Naruto's face. Oi, what's so funny, you bastards? The Jinchuriki shouted indignantly, breaking the 2 grown men out of their laughter. That place is a death trap, kid. Not only are the ruins rigged with traps, but the surrounding waters are home to numerous whirlpools. The older one stated, the younger nodding along. What, so there's no way to get there? Naruto questioned, his face scrunched in confusion. Well, not necessarily, the man began. There is a way, but it's a hard route to navigate. He explained. Very hard. The younger of the two repeated, nodding to himself, earning another glare from the older. Why anyway? What's got you so worked up about Uzumaki? The older man asked, giving Naruto a curious glance, to which Naruto mumbled something incomprehensible. What's that, Gaki? He asked, a frown etched upon his face. My family's from there. It's my ancestral home, Naruto shouted, shocking both the men. What, you mean? The elder began. Yeah, I'm an Uzumaki, what of it? The blonde screamed, both men's surprise was evident on their faces. For real? The eldest questioned, shock still written all over faces, earning a fierce nod from Naruto, determination evident in his eyes. Slowly, however, a grin crept onto the face of the older man before a soft chuckling emanated from his throat. Well, I'll be damned, a real honest-to-God Uzumaki. He giggled, the younger man still looking on in confusion. Well, you know what, brat, how about I take you to the old Uzu ruins then? The man's smile widened upon seeing Naruto's expression. What, you mean it? Naruto stammered, he couldn't believe his ears. Yep, and since I suppose you'll be traveling with us, I guess introductions are in order. The elder exclaimed dramatically, before thumbing his chest. I'm Taro and this here is my younger brother Tari. He said, gesturing to the younger of the two. Nice to meet you. The name's Naruto Uzumaki, the next Hokage of Konoha. The young blonde greeted enthusiastically. 2 days later, waters outside Wave Country. So are you guys sure you know where you're going? A very skeptical Naruto questioned. The trio had set sail the day after meeting one another. Apparently the two brothers were fishermen and owner a small company that had been in their family for generations. Taro, the oldest, had told Naruto that back before the Uzumaki clan had been exterminated, Taro and Tari's family had been in the slumps, but the Uzumakis had gone to them asking to help set up a fish trade business, as the majority of the fish in the area lived on the Wave Country side of the whirlpools surrounding Uzu. Therefore the clan had little resources, so the Uzumakis gave them a client to help re-establish their business, and the Uzumakis gained a source of fish. Hence Taro and Tari's eagerness to help young Naruto. Yeah, don't worry about it, we'll be there soon enough, Taro responded casually. Yep, nothing to worry about. Tari copied, garnering a curious glance from Naruto and yet another glare from Taro. Well, anyway, it still's weird. I mean, I haven't even seen a single whirlpool, Naruto said, obviously agitated by the time it was taking to get there. Well, of course you haven't. Why would anyone sail near or into whirlpools? That's the dumbest thing I ever heard, Taro quipped. Well, how the hell are we getting there then? Isn't Uzumaki meant to be surrounded by whirlpools? Naruto asked, exasperated. Why, we're going round the back, of course. The older fisherman stated, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Upon seeing Naruto's remarkably confused features, he expanded. Not many know this, but there's actually a slim part of the sea which isn't filled by whirlpools. That's how people travel to and from Uzu. While the whirlpools are a great defense from intruders, it's just impractical to have them surround the whole of the land. In fact, I'm pretty sure our family are the only ones to know about it. While Naruto wasn't entirely convinced of this whirlpool-less pathway, he accepted the answer and went back to sulking about the ship they were sailing on before sitting down in his quarters and slipping into a dreamless sleep. A few hours later, and Naruto was abruptly brought out of his rest by the shouts of the two brothers. Rising sleepily, he made his way out onto the deck. Looks like you finally woke up. Taro greeted merrily, just in time too, we're about to arrive, he said before moving off to steer the ship. Speechless, Naruto gazed into horizon and gasped at the sight of the approaching land. The first thing he noticed was the trees. While used to growing up around trees, having been born in Konoha, Naruto had never seen any like this. They stood taller than any tree Naruto had ever seen. In fact, the forest itself wasn't like any forest Naruto had ever seen. It was more like a jungle or a rainforest. As they got closer to the island, Naruto's excitement only grew. He was so close to seeing his ancestral home, where his Ka-chan was born. Sensing the young blonde's excitement, the eldest of the two brothers came over and placed a strong hand on Naruto's shoulder. Listen, brat, I know you're excited and all, and I get how you feel, but just don't get your hopes up, okay? He said in a solemn tone. What did ya mean, Asen? Naruto asked. Well, the village was left in ruins after the Second Great Ninja War. So I'm pretty sure there's not much left there. Sorry kiddo, he replied sympathetically. Oh, was Naruto's only response. While he knew there wouldn't be much left, he was still hoping for something nonetheless. Upon reaching the island, Naruto hopped off the boat and stared wide-eyed at the size of the forestry, craning his head to try and get a look at the top of the trees. Alright Gaki, me and Tari will wait here while you go ahead. The ruins should be located in the center of the island, so just keep going straight from this point and you should reach them. Tori shouted from aboard the ship. What? The young blonde replied, you mean you guys aren't coming with me? Naruto shouted back. No, both brothers said in unison before causing Naruto to sweat drop before Taro explained. Uzumaki was a ninja village, you see. No doubt they would have laid countless traps that as civilians wouldn't be able to avoid. It would be a certain death trap for us to go wandering in there. Oh right, Naruto said to himself. Suppose that's true. He then turned to face the forest and began walking forward. We'll see you later, kid. Stay safe. The eldest brother exclaimed, echoed by Tari. Naruto didn't respond but instead simply raised his hand and waved slightly as a parting gesture before dashing off into the trees. Hours later, and to put it simply, Naruto was lost. He didn't know quite how long it was supposed to take him to reach the center of the island, however he was pretty sure it shouldn't have taken him this long. Not that Taro's directions were any help, he thought to himself irritably. Naruto, however, never one to give up, kept on traveling through the large forest. As time passed, the sky, which was barely visible through the trees, began to darken, and just as the young Uzumaki was about to call it the quits, at least for the day that is, the forestry suddenly gave way to a vast clearing. Naruto gasped at the sight before him. Basked in the soft orange glow of the sunset, a whole village of ruins lay in front of the blonde. While obviously ruins, the structures still stood proudly, exhibiting their past prosperity. Naruto hopped down from the tree he was standing on and walked towards the vast maze of rumble and ruined buildings. In the distance, the wreck of a particularly large building stood, towering over the rest. Seeming like a good place to start his exploration, the Jinchuriki took off towards the building. Having heeded Taro's warning of possible traps, Naruto entered the structure with caution. The building itself was barren of pretty much anything salvageable. All the furniture lay in pieces and bits of broken ninja tools lay scattered across the floor. Nonetheless, he continued further into the building. After exploring countless numbers of empty rooms, Naruto came across a set of great wooden double doors, which despite the ruins around them seemed to be in relatively good condition. With a large shove, the young blonde pushed the double doors open, revealing a large room which reminded him of the Hokage's office back in Konoha. Naruto's eyes ran over the bookcases that lined the walls, slightly annoyed at the fact that they only seemed to contain history books and no jutsu scrolls. At the back of the room stood a sturdy wooden desk. Naruto rushed over to it and began searching through the drawers in hope of finding something worthwhile. To be honest, the Uzumaki didn't quite know what he was looking for, if he was even looking for anything in particular, that is. Part of him, however, secretly hoped he'd come across a family heirloom or something which would connect him with his clan. But after seeing the state that the village was left in, his hopes were dwindling. After rummaging through the majority of the drawers, he found no success. Sighing to himself, he sat down in the large swiveling chair, which somehow seemed in remarkable condition considering its surroundings. Looking down, he noticed a small box placed under the wooden desk. Reaching down, he picked it up carefully, eyeing the spiral engraved upon the lid. Opening it hesitantly, a small smile crept its way across his face as he saw the contents of the box. There, sat in a bed of velvet, was a perfectly maintained Uzumaki forehead protector attached to a jet black headband. Taking it out of the box, his smile grew more content as he traced the spiral engraved on the metal, having found something to connect him with his clan. After a moments of consideration, Naruto used his mouth and his left hand to tie the forehead protector onto his right arm over his bicep, displaying his connection with Uzu with pride, like how Shikamaru wears his. Staring down at his now decorated arm, he sighed contentedly before spinning himself around in a slow, drawling pace, before a piece of parchment on the wall behind the desk caught his eye. Why didn't I notice that before? He wondered to himself. Standing up to get a better look at the text, he read it out loud. When the strength of the whirling tides has fallen, only the blood of an Uzumaki may rekindle the fire that lights the path of the whirlpool. Naruto finished, his face scrunched in thought, pondering on the words written before him. I don't get it, he thought. What's the path of the whirlpool? Shrugging to himself, he reached up and took the parchment from the wall before rolling it up and place it in one of his larger pockets. Looking up, he was shocked to find a seal painted on the wall where the parchment had previously been. Looking into his pocket as if considering the text and then back at the seal on the wall, the young blonde remembered something the old Ero Sanin had said about some seals that could only be released using blood. Ah, fuck it, he said, shrugging once more, not like I've got anything to lose. The young Uzumaki reasoned before grabbing a kunai out of his weapon's pouch and opening a small cut on his thumb and smearing the blood over the seal. Seconds later and nothing happened. Oh well, it was a long shot anyway, Naruto sighed, turning around to leave. As he reached the door, however, the room was covered in a bright blue light as the seal shone. Spinning on his heel, Naruto stared wide-eyed as the seal expanded in complex sequences of kanji covering the entire wall. As the whole wall was engulfed by the Fuinjustu, the room started shaking, and very slowly, the wall began to rise, giving way to another chamber. After a few tense moments, Naruto realized he had been holding his breath. Quickly exhaling, he stepped towards the new room cautiously. Upon reaching the boundary where the wall had risen, the young Jinchuriki gasped at the sight of the chamber. It was more like a corridor than anything really. Its walls were lined with statues of people, both men and women, dressed in traditional Uzumaki battle armor. Each figure had a name engraved onto the base of its stand. Walking down into the chamber, Naruto couldn't help but be amazed at the level of detail carved into each statue. It was as if they were each alive, eyes boring into him. At the end of the corridor stood the largest of the statues. The figure was different from the rest of the other statues, not only in his attire but also his facial features. It wore plain robes instead of armor and had a plain headband tied around his head, covering his forehead up to his eyebrows. His hair, unlike the others whose hair was mostly long and tied into ponytails, was cut short and spiked up at the top in random directions. Two bangs fell through the headband, tied by hairbands at either side of his face. His face was fixed in a stern gaze, which if Naruto was observant, he probably would have realized to be a warning, as if he was guarding the chamber. In front of the statue was a podium, on top of which stood a regal-looking katana, its sheath a simple black with 3 red tomos at the base of the sheath near the handguard. The handle was black but with small red diamonds running up the length of it on both sides and a small red tassel hanging from the end. The handguard was red and circular, designed in the shape of the spiral. Underneath the blade, Naruto noticed writing was engraved onto the stone podium. Here lies the sword of Asura Otsutsuki. Only those of direct descent may wield this blade with strength of the whirling tides. Naruto read aloud. Again, with the strength of the whirling tides, he thought to himself, and who the hell is Asura Otsutsuki? He's not even an Uzumaki, the young blonde questioned mentally. After moments of careful consideration, Naruto decided that since Tsunade Ba-chan had said he was an Uzumaki, he must have been of direct descent, whatever that meant, and since he'd come this far, he might as well take the sword. Reaching out with both hands, the young Uzumaki grasped the blade by the sheath and lifted it up off the stand it was perched upon. Seconds went by and nothing happened. Naruto let out a sigh of relief, having not tripped some crazy elaborate trap. Phew, thought I was gonna have to run for it then, he thought, chuckling to himself. As the young blonde turned to leave, however, the room was once again bathed in the blue glow of a seal activating. Spinning on his heel, Naruto turned to see the great statue of what was presumably the Otsutsuki guide, covered in a complex seal with a large spiral in the middle. Slowly, as if becoming unfrozen, the stone that made up the statue began to chip away, revealing another layer beneath. Naruto gazed on in awe as bit by bit the stone veneer crumbled away, only to reveal a lifelike model of the man portrayed in the statue. What the hell is that? Naruto stuttered, taking a few steps back. To his surprise, however, a voice answered him back. Not, what, child, who? The voice answered, the deep sound resonating throughout the chamber. Now Naruto was really freaking out. Where the hell did that voice come from? He thought frantically. Up here, child. The voice once again boomed, its tone stern but not aggressive, if anything it had a kind ring to it. Naruto looked up in the direction of the voice and was surprised to find the statue behind the sword staring down at him. He opened his mouth to speak, however nothing came out as he again took steps back away from the statue. "Worry not, young one, I'm not here to hurt you. If I was you'd most likely already be dead." The figure consoled, however it did little to ease Naruto's nerves. What do you mean I'd already be dead?" the young Jinchuriki stammered, his fear having eased slightly. "I was placed here as a countermeasure, to ensure that no one unworthy could ever wield the sword in your hands. However, I am also here to greet those who have reclaimed the blade." It explained, before staring at Naruto inquisitively. "In fact, how did you know you were a direct decent child? While you are obviously of my blood, the line is long and clouded. How did you know you were my descendant?" it questioned. Naruto, momentarily snapped out of his fear, took a moment to rub the back of his head and chuckle embarrassingly. Yeah, I kind of didn't?" he said through a foxy smile, noticing the slight falter in the statue's facial expression which could be akin to something like a sweat drop. Coughing, the figure regained his composure. "Well anyway, it began. My name is Asura Otsutsuki, son of Hagoromo Otsutsuki, sage of the Six Paths and heir to his teachings," the figure introduced proudly. "Never heard of you," Naruto said simply, causing the statue's face to falter more visibly this time. "I suppose that's irrelevant," it said, coughing once again. "I am the sole ancestor of the Senju and Uzumaki clans. Through the generations, my will and chakra has been passed on to the one most worthy. The last before you was a certain Senju, Hashirama if I recall correctly," he stated definitively. "The Shodai?" Naruto questioned to himself in wonder. It was all a little much for him to comprehend. He was related to the Shodai? Or they had the same chakra? "Wait, Asura Oji-san, what does any of this mean?" he asked, ignoring the fact that the figure's eyebrow twitched upon hearing his term of address. "It means, young one, that your path will be long and will contain many hardships that you must face. You are not gifted with natural talent, much like myself, therefore must work hard to attain strength to protect those closest to you. It also means your fate is intertwined with that of another, who carries the will and chakra of my brother, Indra," he answered. Naruto didn't know why, but as soon as Asura mentioned the descendant of Indra, his mind immediately conjured images of Sasuke. "Go now, child, and become strong. Wield that sword with pride in the name of all those who have wielded it before you, and keep your will strong, it's all us geniuses of hard work have, after all," Asura advised in a sage-like tone. "You bet, Asura Oji-san, I'll become stronger than even you," Naruto declared, earning the small curt laugh from the old sage. Suddenly the seal once again flashed of the figure of Asura as stone began creeping its way up his body, covering it. Looking on with a content smile, Naruto waited until the figure was completely encased in stone, before turning and walking back down through the long chamber. What he failed to notice, however, was the small grin that now graced the newly reformed statue's features. After Naruto's encounter with the reanimating statue in Uzushiogakure, he had decided to stay the night and sleep under the stars of his ancestral home. The next day, wakened by the sunrise, Naruto set back off to meet back up with Taro and Tari. They hadn't been too hard to find, as all Naruto needed to do was find the coast and then follow it till he came across them. Taro and Tari had noticed Naruto's new gear, including the forehead protector now tied to his arm and the new sword, but decided not to question him, as whatever happened must have been personal. Now, 1 week later, Naruto was sat legs crossed in the forest surrounding the small village that he'd met the two brothers, intent on training his kenjutsu. Having not so much as even glanced at the scrolls beforehand, he had no idea what to expect. From what he could tell so far, there were 3 different styles, just like Tsunade Bachan had said. Looking over the first style, he read the description aloud. Shinku no Dansu, the Crimson Dance. He read, used most typically by female Uzumaki members. This style takes advantage of the female body's natural flexibility and smaller frame to maneuver around the target, using mostly jabs and quick slashes, utilizing speed and skill over strength and power to slowly wear the victim down, before inflicting the fatal strike. As suggested by the name, the style involves the fluid and coherent combination of attacks mixed with complex footwork to get within the opponent's guard, thus placing great emphasis on body positioning and placement in battle over more sword-based skills such as parrying. Since the style is movement-based, it is more defense-orientated as a lot of the style revolves around avoiding the target's strikes and waiting for the correct moment to attack. This style is also recommended for any assassination or stealth-based kenjutsu users regardless of their. Naruto finished before looking off into the forestry, adopting a thinking pose. While the style does sound cool, he thought out loud, I don't think I have the skill or flexibility to pull it off. Ah well, what's next? The young blonde questioned to himself before continuing. Alright, Style 2, Shinku no Akari, the Crimson Wrath. He began, chuckling to himself. Hee cool name, he thought before continuing. This second style revolves around the user's strength and power, being the antithesis of Shinku no Dansu. The style involves the user blitzing opponents with series of sweeping slashes and lunges to overwhelm their target. The style is primarily offensive, aiming to swarm the victim until a breach in their defense is found, which they would then capitalize on. Since the style is heavily biased for offense, the user must leave their defense open but compensates for this due to their constant attacking. Each strike is packed with power and intent to kill. If the user enters the battle without the resolve to kill or do serious harm, then the attacks will become affectless. Wow. Naruto's eyes scanned back over the words he had just read. While the style sounded cool and in many ways fitted his attributes, it didn't fit his mentality. While Naruto had in many ways hardened his resolve to kill, to go into every battle with the intent to end that person's life. That just wasn't him. It wasn't what he stood for or what he believed in. Unfurling the scroll further, Naruto glanced at the last style, Shinkashoku no Soyokaze. The Crimson Breeze. He breathed before reading on. This series of techniques combines attributes needed to utilize both Shinku no Dansu and Shinku no Akari, therefore making it the hardest of the three to learn. Furthermore, the style is traditionally only used by the main line of Uzumakis, hence learned by all previous clan heads and heirs. The style primarily relies on drawing techniques of two variations, standard grip and reverse grip, and henceforth seeks to finish the battle in one move. However, unlike Shinku no Akari, the end result does not have to be fatal. If the initial move doesn't end the fight, users will utilize their speed in short bursts combined with controlled power strikes in and out of the opponent's defense in order to break down the target, differentiating from its more violent variant style in that the attacks aren't continuous. The style also isn't ideal for attacking when hidden, as requires ample room and a direct line in order to complete the drawing techniques. Naruto finished, his mind buzzing as he considered the written words. However, all thoughts seemed to come to one conclusion. The style was awesome. While yes, seemingly hard to learn, it had everything. Considering some of the negatives, however, he realized he would have to increase his speed dramatically as well as his control over his chakra and strength. Weighing up the pros and cons, Naruto concluded that the style was worth it and that despite the difficulty, he would learn it. Sighing, the young Uzumaki fell back onto the ground with the Kenjutsu scroll resting on his stomach. Looking up, he realized how late it had gotten, as the sky was already streaked with that warm orange glow of the sunset he loved so much. Closing his eyes, he smiled at thought of all the future training he was going to be doing and unconsciously reached out, grasping the katana that lay by his side and held it to his chest. Inhaling slowly, then exhaling, he embraced the smells and sounds of the forest, letting the tranquil atmosphere overcome him, as he slipped into a peaceful slumber. Naruto was slowly woken from his sleep by the morning sunrays that crept through the forest treeline and fell on his resting face. Oh, and that loud brash shouting didn't help either. For fuck's sake, kid, wake up. The voice continued. Naruto groaned in protest before groggily opening his eyes. Alright geez, I'm up. The blonde mumbled. Looking up, he saw the blurred outline of a tall man with a great mane of white hair. Ero-sanin? What are you doing here? Wah, what do you mean, what am I doing here, you little punk? I'm supposed to be training you. The old sage retorted. Yeah, supposed to be. The blonde muttered under his breath, not catching the fury build in his sensei's face. What's that supposed to mean? He ground out. Isn't it obvious? He began, shouting now. All that you've done since we've been on this trip is do your research. Which is just an excuse for to be a perv, or whoring while I'm left to do pointless exercises. I could have learned more than I have by now if I'd stayed in Konoha. Now breathing heavily, Naruto stared defiantly into Jiraiya's eyes. The sage met Naruto's gaze, however, after a few moments gave up and sighed, lowering his head. "Geez kid, you're gonna be the death of me," he said before looking up back at Naruto. "So what do you want, huh?" he asked. To be trained, Naruto started, but continued when he saw Jiraiya open his mouth. "On my own terms. I want to make a schedule so that over the 3 years I improve my fuinjutsu, kenjutsu, speed and chakra control mainly, while also working on my chakra chains. Well, if I actually have them, that is. Oh yeah, and increasing my jutsu range. All I know is Kage Bunshin, which I taught myself, the summoning jutsu and the Rasengan plus the academy jutsu. How the hell am I supposed to survive with just them? I'm a joke. Alright, I get it, Gaki. Damn, I need drink." The toad sage huffed before eyeing Naruto's new sword suspiciously. "Oi kid, where'd you get that katana anyways? You didn't steal it, did you?" he said, eyes narrowing. "What? No? I found it, it's mine," Naruto said, clutching the sword to his chest defensively. "You found it?" Jiraiya repeated, earning a nod from Naruto. "Where on earth did you find a sword like that?" "Uzu," he answered, simply causing the older man to stare back at the young blonde dumbly. "Uzu," the sage echoed. "Yep, as in Uzu Shiogakure? HN. What, you went to Uzu by yourself?" "AAAND found that," the sage shouted in shock, pointing accusingly sword. "Yeah," Naruto replied casually, using his little finger to pick at his ear absent-mindedly. "How?" Jiraiya asked after a pregnant pause. "Ma, it's a long story, I'll tell you after ramen," he replied simply before strolling into the forest towards the village, leaving a dumbstruck sage in his wake. "Damn Naruto, that's one hell of a story," Jiraiya said as Naruto finished telling his tale, before taking a slow sip of his sake. "I'm still surprised you found something there though. I went there a long time ago and didn't find a single thing." "Yeah," Naruto said, pausing from indulging in his ramen. "I'm just glad I found something to connect me with my clan." Sighing, he glanced down at his newly decorated arm, a small smile gracing his features. Jiraiya watched on with a grin of his own. "Alright Gaki, let's get this schedule drawn up, he said, immediately drawing the young boy's attention, pulling out a blank scroll, a calligraphy brush and ink. "So, you wanted to work on kenjutsu, fuinjutsu, ninjutsu, control and possibly your chakra chains. Well, I think you're also gonna have to work a little on genjutsu, not so much the jutsu themselves but more how to detect and release them." Ignoring Naruto's sour face at the mention of his worst topic, the old sage continued. "I'm gonna have you work a little with the toads as well so you know which ones to summon in the right situations." Mumbling to himself, the old man then began scrawling on the scroll. After a few moments of furious writing, Jiraiya stopped before looking over his work before nodding to himself appreciatively. "Okay, so the first year. I reckon we'll start with the nitty-gritty stuff. The first year we'll cover control and conditioning, that includes speed and strength. I'll also assign you some ninjutsu to learn throughout the year so you don't get too restless. Now that I think about it, I might add in some strategizing as well," he said, mumbling the last part while working over the scroll with his brush. "Wait, hold up, Ero-sanin. You mean that for the whole first year, presuming the 3 years start from now, I'm not going to learn anything Uzumaki related?" Naruto protested angrily. "I said I wanted to learn train on my own terms, and I want to learn the Uzumaki stuff first," he demanded. Naruto's anger, however, was quickly turned to shock when Jiraiya's hand slammed upon the counter of the ramen stand, shocking the owner also. "Listen here, you little punk. I may have agreed to train you in the areas you wanted, but let's not forget who the Sanin here is. What you may not have realized, or what that scroll on kenjutsu didn't quite get through your thick skull, is that you can't just learn techniques left and right." The sage began before throwing his arms up in exasperation. "I mean shit, do you really think it's that easy? Take kenjutsu. Samurai and most nin have to go through vigorous conditioning of both body and mind, doing countless exercises to perfectly tune themselves to the way of the sword before they've even picked one up." Upon seeing Naruto's face contort into one of protest, he quickly continued. "What, do you think you'd just be able to do some speed and strength work while you train your katas, without laying down the foundation attributes necessary to effectively train in the style? If you do that, the configuration between your strength and speed and your swordplay will be out of sync. You'd have to keep adapting one or the other, making needless work for yourself," he finished, panting slightly. Noticing the downcast expression on the young blonde's face, Jiraiya adopted a softer tone. Listen Gaki. I know you want to follow the footsteps of the Uzumaki in your dream of becoming Hokage. And that's great, but these things take time, you know. You have to work at it step by step. There's no shortcut to becoming Hokage after all. Your words, not mine. The sage said with a smile. Naruto looked up at the old sage, unshed tears saddening his eyes and a small smile playing across his lips. Thanks, Arrow Gigi. He chuckled softly. I guess I was being a bit of a brat, huh? You can say that again, Jiraiya laughed. Anyway, let's find somewhere to stay the night, and tomorrow we'll start your training. He announced before getting up off the stool he was perched upon and walking off. Naruto stood to follow before he was interrupted by a stern and angry-looking ramen stand owner, holding out his hand expectantly, making Naruto blink in confusion. Shit. 8 months later. Oi Arrow-sensei, can I get down yet? A rather tired Naruto shouted in a strained voice. Looking up briefly, the man in question eyed the blonde before returning to his notes. Nah, you still got a bit to go. Naruto was currently hanging from a large tree branch using the tree climbing exercise to stick to the bark. He had his arms spread out and hanging off each by the forearm were boulders tied by rope. Jiraiya had picked the exercise up whilst observing a clan of samurai in the Land of Iron. When Naruto had first began using it, the boulders had been small and at first didn't seem to strain the blonde. However, since it was an endurance exercise, they still after a while took their toll on his body nonetheless. Currently the boulders being used were about the size of a cow, and the blonde had been hanging for at least a couple of hours now. So far in his training, however, Naruto had made quite a bit of progress. His control over his chakra had increased dramatically, however was still relatively low. His strength had also increased and his control over that was coming along nicely. Due to his body work heat and his natural aging, he'd managed to bulk up slightly, and while remaining lean rather than bulky, was no longer scrawny. Another bonus to his conditioning was that he'd grown a bit taller and now stood at 5 feet 1 inch as opposed to his 4 feet 8 inches stature upon leaving the leaf. Gaki, you can probably come down now, Jiraiya suddenly spoke, eliciting a sigh of relief from the Uzumaki before he dropped the boulders, cause a plume of dust to rise up and drop down. Ah, it's never felt so good to be so light. Naruto exclaimed happily before sitting himself down next to his sensei. Nay Arrow-sensei. Do you ever write anything other than smut? The old man grunted in response. It's not smut, you brat, it's graphic romance. Yeah, that's just a fancy way of saying smut, the blonde retorted before eyeing the notes critically. I don't get why your books are so loved anyways, they're not even that good. He commented offhandedly. Peeved, like you'd know anything, kid, this is fine literature. Yeah, up there with Shakespeare. Naruto responded sarcastically. Wait, who is that? He questioned internally before shrugging to himself. At any rate, I'm gonna go wash up, I'll be back for dinner. He said, ignoring the old sage's mumbling, walking off to a nearby lake. Currently, the duo were in the Land of Waterfalls, near the border of the Land of Earth. Since the country was full of lakes and rivers, it was ideal for chakra control and conditioning exercises. They'd been camping in the same clearing for about 1 week now, having traveled back through the Land of Fire from the wave at a leisurely pace as Jiraiya had contacts from his spy network that needed attending to. Approaching the lake, Naruto took to the trees, having regained some of his strength. A few minutes later he arrived at the clearing, however stopped and paused on a branch, hidden slightly, at the sight of a person in the clearing. Cute, was the one thought that ran through the young teen's mind as he drank in the girl's image, a slight red tinge glazing his cheeks. She had dark pink, pupil-less eyes and short jet black hair that shaped her face, wearing a red underarmour which ended mid-thigh, with the right sleeve missing and the right loose. Over her right side she also had a sash of sorts or half-dress thing that was in a slightly darker shade of red that Naruto couldn't quite see the point of. Over the bodysuit she wore a brown flak jacket and mesh stockings adorned her legs. Looking on more analytically, Naruto noticed she was unmistakably a kunoichi, and could see a headband hidden behind her fringe, however the village symbol was obscured. After mentally disciplining himself for momentarily giving into the force of the perv, he realized the young kunoichi was breathing heavily and seemed to be physically strained. Slowly she sat down by the water's edge, wincing as she met the hard ground before clutching her leg in pain. As she did so, Naruto spotted tears in her stockings and an angry bruise that seemed to be forming on her left thigh. Before he could even consider going down to help her out, however, a swoosh of air drew his attention to the tree line at the opposite side of the clearing as multiple kunai flew towards the injured kunoichi. The girl managed to roll backwards out of the way into a crouch as the weapons implanted themselves into the ground where she was once sitting. Shortly after, one light and one dark-colored blur shot out of the tree line, landing in the clearing. The taller of the two had a mop of spiked messy brown hair, dark-colored eyes, and wore a yellow shirt with a blue tie under a white trench coat with a high collar, and had a nasty smirk on his face. The smaller of the two was uninteresting to say the least. He was bald with nothing special about his facial features other than his scowl. He also wore a plain black suit with a white shirt and black tie. Where have I seen those two before? Naruto thought to himself, squinting his eyes at the pair. Now Kuritsuchi-chan, we can't have you running away now, can we? The taller of the two announced, after all you were the one that attacked me and my friends in the first place. His face twisting into a predatory grin. Fuck you Gantetsu, you pig. The kunoichi, now identified as Kuritsuchi, shouted back venomously. Silently Naruto created a dozen cage bunshin and ordered them to surround the clearing from the tree line. One of the other traits he picked up in his short time so far was patience. He didn't always charge in head first now. Well, not always anyway. Such a foul mouth for such a pretty little girl. Gantetsu smirked, seemingly amused, earning a dark giggle from his plain partner. What should we do with her, boss? She's obviously injured, he commented. Good question, Choseki. What should we do with her? Gantetsu questioned rhetorically, before running his eyes over her form. Well, I have few ideas in mind. Meanwhile, Kuritsuchi shakily made her way to her feet while glaring heatedly at the rouge pair. You fuckers ain't gonna do shit. She shouted defiantly, however her physical state contradicted her words, which wasn't missed by the onlooking blonde. Enough talk. Choseki, he began, his face becoming stern, a feral glint remaining in his eyes, before turning to his accomplice, deal with her. Upon hearing the command, the bald man jumped into action, approaching the pink-eyed kunoichi at speed. Bringing his arm back, he began the fight by throwing a straight punch which Kuritsuchi dodged with relative ease, however her pain was evident on her face. The bald nin followed with a series of kicks and punches which were avoided, however, with each successive attack. The girl's evasive movements become more and more sluggish. It was clear that she was the better ninja, maybe even than both of them, however her injuries were impairing her tremendously. Choseki suddenly hopped back and ran through some hand seals, Doden. Doryuso, Earth Release. Earth Flow Spears. He shouted before a single spear made of mud and pieces of rock shot out of the ground, aiming at Kuritsuchi's head. Thinking quickly, the teen bent back at the waist, demonstrating her flexibility. However her leg gave way and she collapsed back before rolling backwards, finding her feet. Taking advantage of her opponent's sudden weakness, Choseki rushed forwards and aimed a straight kick to the girl's injured leg, connecting painfully. With a contained scream of pain, Kuritsuchi stumbled back, hold her leg, putting most her weight onto her healthy one. Grinning at his success, the bald nin brandished a kunai before moving in to finish the job. The young kunoichi looked up only to snap her eyes shut at the sight of the kunai coming down upon her as she waited for her impending death. A few moments passed and no pain came. Slowly, she opened her eyes only to come see the pain-riddled face of Choseki, kunai in hand ready to strike, before a gurgling sound emanated from his throat as he choked out blood which dribbled down his chin. The nin then fell to his knees and subsequently collapsed face first onto the turf. It was then that Kuritsuchi noticed the kunai embedded into the man's back, surrounded by a large red patch. What? Who's there, you bastard? A suddenly agitated Gantetsu shouted out into the surrounding tree line as he palmed a kunai and held it in front of him defensively. No response was heard and soft breeze whistled through the clearing, rustling the grass. You don't scare me, you bastard. I'm the Densetsu no Anin, legendary dark shinobi. Meanwhile, Kuritsuchi sighed in relief and tried to stand up straighter before a wave of pain ignited her left side, causing her to stumble forward. Before she fell completely, however, a pair of strong arms caught her, causing the pink-eyed teen's eyes to widen comically. You shouldn't move too much, that leg looks quite bad. A throaty voice said softly. Looking up, the first thing she noticed were two bright cerulean eyes which seemed to shine with goodwill. Momentarily lost, she examined the rest of the figure's face to noticing 2 sets of 3 whiskers on each cheek resting upon tanned skin. She then noticed the unruly blonde locks which seemed to spite each and every way. Unable to help herself, a soft blush graced her face as he stared at the face of her savior. "Hello, you okay?" Naruto waved his hand in front of her face jokingly. "Huh? Oh yeah, it's just my legs pretty messed up," Kuritsuchi managed, shaking herself out of her daze. Behind the two, however, Gantetsu decided to take advantage of their moment and lunged at the unassuming blonde with deadly intent. As the blade came down, it was suddenly blocked by the kunai of 2 separate figures. Gantetsu's face twisted into one of shock as he gazed at the 2 identical forms that blocked his attack, before noticing they were also identical to the blonde currently coddling his prey. Growling, the man jumped back, still holding the kunai in front of himself. Naruto, the real Naruto, on the other hand, simply sighed. "If you'll excuse me, I've got some trash to take care of," he said politely, gently placing the stunned kunoichi on the ground before slowly turning to face the snarling Gantetsu, and walking in between his 2 clones, a stern expression on his face. "I'll give you one chance," he began. Noticing the man's confused expression, he continued, "I'll give you one chance to run, take it and you'll be spared. Otherwise, you won't be so lucky." A pause followed as another breeze rustled through the clearing. Slowly, however, the sound of soft chuckling began break the silence, which then turned into full-blown laughter. You think you can beat me, kid?" Gantetsu managed through his fits of laughter. "Ah, that's the best thing I've heard in a while," he said as his laughter died down as his face turned serious before twisting into a manic grin. "Do you even know who I am? I'm the mighty Densetsu no Anin. A little brat like you doesn't even stand a chance." More crazed laughter ensued as the man palmed another kunai. "Enough talk," Naruto interjected coolly. "You've had your chance." He then clicked his fingers with one hand. Gantetsu opened his mouth to make a smart comment, however was interrupted as a barrage of kunai flew towards him from all angles. Cursing under his breath, he jumped backwards, deflecting what kunai he could from the front, however was unable to prevent a few from grazing his legs and arms. He then turned to look back at the blonde, only to find him standing with his hands held out by his side with the palms facing upwards and the 2 clones surrounding him constructing some form of glowing orbs. His attention was suddenly drawn from the teen as a dozen clones or so jumped out of the tree line surrounding the clearing and engaged him. Momentarily overwhelmed by the sudden mass of clones, Gantetsu took numerous slashes and cuts to his arms and torso as he tried frantically to defend himself. One by one, he managed to dispel the clones until there were only 3 left. Eyeing the clones cautiously, he took a few tentative steps backwards, already planning his escape. The 3 clones then rushed forwards towards him, criss-crossing their paths in order to confuse the Rouge Nin. Suddenly the 3 duplicates threw their kunai at Gantetsu before jumping off to the side, his attention focused on deflecting the kunai. He didn't notice the original blonde sprinting towards him, a blue spiraling ball in each hand. When he did notice, however, it was too late. The first sphere of chakra crashed into his stomach, grinding into his skin, before the second slammed into his chest, sending the missing nin flying backwards into the path of a large tree which cracked under the impact. Turning around, Naruto dispelled his remaining clones before walking slowly back to the prone kunoichi, who stared on wide-eyed. What a destructive jutsu! He took that guy out without even breaking a sweat, she thought to herself. As the blonde approached her, Kuritsuchi couldn't help but notice how the blonde's eyes weren't that vibrant blue she'd seen earlier but a dull blue, void of life. "Oi, are you okay?" she called out hesitantly, causing Naruto to meet her gaze. Realizing he'd let his facade slip and lost his composure, he silently cursed before sighing and scratching his head, embarrassed. "Yeah, I guess. I'm just not sure I've got my head around this killing thing yet. It's not nice," he said lamely, looking at the ground ashamed. "Well, of course it isn't nice, we're ninja. Life's not always full of happy endings, you know?" she commented sarcastically. Noticing the forlorn look on her savior's face, however, she adopted a softer tone. "But, if it's any consolation, you know save my life and stuff." She struggled with the words as if not used to giving praise. Naruto accepted it all the same, giving her a small grin. "I suppose I did." Kuritsuchi, now looking at the blonde's full appearance, noticed he was roughly the same height as her, although looked a year or so younger. He wore a plain black shirt which had 3/4 length sleeves showing off the long-sleeved mesh underneath it and plain black trousers. A necklace hung loosely around his neck showing off an expensive-looking stone which she had never seen anything like before. All in all, she thought the blonde standing before her was quite the looker, in his own slightly weird, exotically roguish way. "Who are you anyways?" she asked after a moment of eyeing up the blonde. "Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto. And you?" he replied with a bright smile, his eyes relighting with that shine she had seen earlier. "Huh? Oh, Kuritsuchi. You sure?" Naruto joked, eyebrow quirked. "Yeah, I'm sure, you punk kid," she quipped in mock anger. "Kid? You're barely older than me." "Yeah, well, you're still a kid. A kid who just saved your ass." Peeved, "If I wasn't injured, could have dealt with those guys no problem." "Yeah, sure, that's what they all say." "Oh? You go around spying on people's own affairs often then?" Instead of replying, Naruto simply huffed and sat himself on the ground opposite the girl before looking over her leg. "So what did those guys want with you anyways?" he asked after a moment, noticing Kuritsuchi flinch slightly. "Well, back in Iwa they are, or were missing Nin, you see, and I might have pestered my Gigi for a solo mission involving their capture," she admitted before sighing. "What I didn't expect was for them to have a whole group of bandits following them. By the time I'd fought off all them, I'd already used a lot of chakra, and then this happened." She gestured to her injured leg, "And so I decided to flee, and well, here I am." "Who's your Gigi?" Naruto questioned curiously. "The Tsuchikage." "What?" Kurodachi immediately regretted telling the blonde. "They all acted the same after they found out. Boot-licking bastards. My ba-chan would never give me a mission as cool as that." "Huh?" Kuritsuchi managed, stupefied by Naruto's response. "Yeah, she would always go on about how I'm not ready, or just call me a brat or something." He grumbled childishly. "Who's your ba-chan?" Kuritsuchi asked tentatively, however something told her she already knew the answer. "The Hokage." What? That wasn't the answer she was expecting. She was thinking more along the lines of a stuck-up noble or an overly protective grandmother. Not only that the kid was related to a Kage, the Hokage no less. Kuritsuchi was immediately on the defensive as she stared at the blonde with fierce eyes and tensed her muscles. What's the mean glare for?" he asked innocently. "You're from Konoha." "Yeah, and I'm from Iwa." "Okay." No response? "Really? I don't understand. Was I supposed to say something?" Naruto scratched his head, confusion evident on his face. "You're from Konoha and I'm from Iwa. You should hate me, and I you." Naruto tilted his head to the side. "I don't hate you, Kuritsuchi-chan. I don't even know you," he replied, simply earning a growl from the pink-eyed Kunoichi. "Yet you're adding chan to my name," she thought in frustration. Glaring into his innocent, puppy dog face, Kuritsuchi sighed as she decided it wasn't worth getting agitated over. Leaning back onto her hands, she gazed up into the sky before closing her eyes and enjoying the silence. Until she felt a pair of calloused hands touch her thigh, that is. Opening one eye, she stared down at the blonde who seemed to be trying to apply a bandage to her leg. "What do you think you're doing?" she asked with a certain edge to her voice. "Air first aid?" Naruto replied innocently. "I'm not too good with medic stuff, but I know the basics. If you don't want me to, then I won't, but that wound's pretty bad." With the concern evident in his tone. Unable to help a subtle blush adorn her cheeks, Kuritsuchi huffed and looked off to the side. "Fine, just get on with it." "Hi." Naruto then enthusiastically began bandaging the wound on the teen's thigh. Kuritsuchi took this opportunity to study his face and watched in awe at the concentration the boy was exhibiting. "There. All done," he exclaimed exuberantly. Kuritsuchi looked over his work with an analytical eye. Not bad," she admitted, before lowering her head, her face scrunching up as if struggling with her thoughts, before mumbling something incoherent. "What? I didn't catch that?" Naruto asked. "I said, thanks," she said a little louder, "for everything. Not everyone would have done what you did, especially not most Konoha nin." Naruto smiled at her honesty before shrugging. "Well, I guess I'm not like most people then." Kuritsuchi laughed softly. "I guess you're not," she said before looking up at the sky and realizing it was getting dark. "Anyways, I should be going now. I'm supposed to be meeting up with backup soon." Carefully, and under the watchful eye of Naruto, she rose from her sitting position and tested out her injured leg. Deeming it okay to walk on, she stood straight, with most the pressure on her right leg. "You sure you're okay getting back?" Naruto asked, concerned. Yeah, I'll be fine, she said, turning and hobbling towards the forest line before stopping and facing the young blonde. Thanks again, Naruto. I mean it, she then continued towards the forest. Nay, Kuritsuchi-chan. Naruto called after her as she reached the tree line, causing her to turn slightly. You think we could meet again sometime? Like tomorrow maybe? Same place? He asked hesitantly, causing the girl to pause and look at him. After a few moments, she smirked slightly before nodding her head in the briefest of fashion and walking into the forestry. Naruto grinned in response. He'd made a new friend. Lying on his back, he closed his eyes and thought of all the times that lay ahead, smiling at the thought. It had been a week since Naruto had his fateful encounter with Kuritsuchi. Since then, they'd met up at the same lake they'd first met each other every day at sunset. Naruto smiled fondly at the memories of their time together, which mostly involved him talked animatedly about his training with Arrow Sannin, which she'd been surprised to find out was actually Jiraiya of the Sannin, and his pranks. He'd discovered Kuritsuchi was quite calm and laid back and didn't scold him so much if he did or said anything stupid, unlike Sakura, except one time. Only one time so far had he experienced her temper. They'd been sparring in the clearing, taijutsu only, and let's just say Naruto used a submission move which ended with them being in a very comprising position, with Naruto's hands, unintentionally, upon certain assets. Needless to say, Naruto didn't want to experience her wrath again. It put Sakura's to shame. Naruto was currently sat in the middle of the same clearing by the lake waiting for the kunoichi. His clothing slightly scuffed as he'd just come from another day's work of conditioning training with Arrow Sensei, which was grueling to say the least. Boo! A feminine voice whispered in Naruto's ear, causing him to jump in the air and consequently let out a small, feminine squeal. A scared expression planted on his face. His shocked demeanor dropped, however, when he saw the face of the now laughing Kuritsuchi. Aha, that's the best thing. She bent over, clutching her sides, laughing harder, causing Naruto's annoyance to grow. I can't speak wheeze, you actually squealed. She now had tears forming in her eyes. Alright, I get it, you got me, great. Good for you. Naruto muttered in irritation, however he couldn't help but let a small smile tug at his lips. That was another thing he liked about Kuritsuchi. She had a sense of humor, which included pranks. Oh my, she said, wiping the tears from her eyes, now standing up straight. I haven't laughed that much in a while. Glad I could help. Naruto mumbled sarcastically. Now Whiskers-chan, don't get stroppy, just cause I beat you at your own game. I'm not stroppy, he retorted, followed by a pregnant pause. Oi, and don't call me that, Bakutsuchi. Naruto joked, now laughing at the new nickname he'd assigned the girl, causing a small blush to form across her cheeks as she stared in shock at the blonde. No one had ever insulted her name before. Wha, don't call me that, Yugaki. Ma, it's just a nickname, no need to get so angry, Bakutsuchi. Why yeah, well two can play at that game, Temeruto. That was awful, you know that right? Yeah, the kunoichi sighed, before shaking herself out of her slump and looking down at the blonde. Anyway Naruto, there's something I need to tell you. What is it, Kuritsuchi-chan? Naruto said, his brow furrowed as he stood up to face the girl. Well, you see, my injuries are pretty much all healed up, so me and my team are set to move out. She said, averting her eyes. Oh, when do you leave? Well, kinda around about now. Quote, what, you're leaving now? Naruto asked, tilting his head in confusion. God, he looks cute when he does that puppy dog thing. Kuritsuchi thought to herself suddenly, managing to contain her blush. Yeah, I just told my team that I needed to bathe quickly, then we'd leave. So you? Naruto started before trailing off. Yeah, I came to say goodbye. Kuritsuchi confirmed with a small smile. Alright, well I guess I'll see you around then, Kuritsuchi-chan. Naruto said, a soft smile playing across his face. Yeah, don't forget to write to me though. She replied jokingly. Huh? How am I supposed to do that? It would be pretty shady if a Konoha and an Iwa nin were exchanging letters. Kuritsuchi shrugged. I dunno, use your toads or something, your sensei would probably tell you how. That's a good idea, Kuritsuchi-chan. I'll definitely send you some letters. The blonde replied enthusiastically, placing both hands behind his head, a wide grin on his face. Oh, and one last thing, Kuritsuchi said, walking towards the teen until they were almost face to face, the girl craning her head to look up at the Jinchuriki. Huh, what is it, Kuritsuchi-chan? he managed, blushing slightly at their proximity. The kunoichi didn't reply, however. Instead, reaching up with one hand, she gently stroked his whiskered cheek before getting up on her tiptoes and placing a soft, lingering kiss on his lips. "I'll see you around, don't go getting soft on me now, Naruto-kun," she said, before winking, a teasing grin gracing her features and turning around, walking towards the forestry, a seductive sway added to her hips which Naruto couldn't help but be entranced by. Before long, Naruto was left standing alone in the clearing, a blush still dusting his cheeks. That had been his first kiss. Well, not counting the accidental kiss with the Sasuke Teme. Ah, young love, I've never been so proud of my dear little apprentice. Naruto was stunned out of his daze as he turned to face Jiraiya, weeping comical tears of joy. "You saw that?" Naruto asked, his voice strangely monotone. "Why, of course. It was golden stuff Gaki," the sage shouted passionately before gazing off into the distance with stars in his eyes. "Oh, I can just see it now. Two lovers from opposing villages, captured by a forbidden love," he said melodramatically. "Arrow Gigi." Naruto raged. "Oops. 3 months later. Alright Gaki, we're coming to the last month of your first year's worth of training, so it's time to mix things up a little bit," Jiraiya said as they sat down in a clearing, in which a small stream ran through. "Yosh, Arrow-sensei, what are we gonna be doing?" Naruto questioned excitedly. "For the next month we're gonna see if you have those chakra chains that your mother and some of the Uzumakis had," he answered while searching through his traveling pack. "Yes, this is gonna be so cool. I'm definitely gonna rock these chains," the young blonde exclaimed, ecstatic at the prospect of finally learning some Uzumaki techniques. Don't get you hopes too high though kid, we don't even know if you can do this yet." "Now where did I put? Ah, here it is," the sage mumbled to himself before pulling out a large scroll. "Nay, what's that, Arrow-sensei?" Naruto asked, staring at the scroll inquisitively. "This, my boy, is how we're going to check whether you have the capability to pull the level of chakra manipulation to create chakra chains," Jiraiya said, making Naruto go wide-eyed. "Woo, how's it work, huh sensei?" "Alright Gaki, all you gotta do is place both hands on the scroll here, channel some chakra and it should act as a catalyst causing the specialized chakra to appear," he said, before frowning, placing one hand on his chin. "Thing is though, I'm not sure if this is gonna work since it's normally only used for Kekai Genkais." "Oh well, we might as well try it out," Naruto said, rolling out the scroll, eliciting a shrug from the sage. "Alright, so how it should work is, if we're talking Mokuton for example, if someone channeled their chakra into it, plant life would grow, so for you chakra chains should appear?" the toad sage determined rhetorically. Nodding his head, Naruto placed both hands on the scroll and channeled chakra into it. Moments went by as nothing happened. Frowning, Naruto channeled more chakra into the scroll, however still nothing happened. "Arrow-sensei, it's not working," Naruto whined. "Quit bitchin' Gaki, you knew that there was a chance you wouldn't have the chains," Jiraiya replied sternly. "I know, but still," the blonde said dejectedly, "guess I'll try again, just in case." He then, once again placed both his hands' palms down upon the scroll. Strengthening his resolve mentally, he pushed more chakra than he had done before, causing a light blue glow to form around him. Suddenly, as if a dam bursting, Naruto felt a surge of chakra rush through him. Opening his eyes, his eyebrows shot up in wonder at the sight of dozens of dark orange chakra chains snaking their way throughout the clearing, whipping about the air as if having lives on their own. Looking to the side with a wide grin on his face, he saw Jiraiya's stunned expression. "Told you I'd rock it, sensei," he remarked smugly, causing the sage to laugh heartily. "You sure did kid, you sure did." 10 months later, Iron Country. "Yo bro," shouted a small toad as it popped into existence in a plume of smoke. "Hugamakichi? What's up?" Naruto questioned, looking up from his notes. So far in his second year of training he'd made a lot of progress in Kenjutsu, however in Fuinjutsu he'd thrived, going from a level 1 to 3 borderline 4 in just 9 months. "I got some letter for you," Gamakichi replied perkily, "and they're all yours, as long as you give me candy." He finished, causing Naruto to sigh dramatically. "Common Naruto, you know the deal. I'm your messenger and you give me candy." Fine, here you go. Now give me those letters," the boy conceded, handing the toad a small paper bag of sweets. "Who are they from?" he asked as the toad places the small bag into his messenger pack before rummaging for the letters. You got one from Sakura, and one from the old lady. Gamakichi replied, smirking at the slight tinge of sadness that crept its way across Naruto's face. Oh, and one from your Iwa girl. What, from Kuritsuchi-chan? The teen replied, perking up instantly. Yep, alright, gimme. Here you go. Summon me when you want some return, but don't forget the candy. The toad warned as it puffed out of sight, leaving Naruto to read the letters. I suppose I'll start with Sakura-chan's, he said to himself before opening the scroll. Dear Naruto, oi Ero-sensei, Naruto called out, catching the attention of the man in question as he sat on a bar stool in a bar enjoying some sake. What's up, brat? He said before, adopting a hissing whisper. Can't you see I'm working on my game here? He nodded his head over to the corner of the bar where two, incredibly attractive, girls sat. Naruto just rolled his eyes at the man's before, completely used to it by now. Ba-chan sent me this letter today and it had a scroll attached to it about a mission. She said you should have a look at it too. Naruto said, handing the sage the scroll. So Gamakichi delivered you a batch of letters today, huh? He asked the blonde. Yeah, any from your Iwa girl? The perv questioned with a lopsided grin and a wiggle of his eyebrows. Just read the damn scroll. Naruto huffed, crossing his arms over his chest and looking off to the side. The telltale blush on his cheeks told wonders, however. Jiraiya grinned at the boy's actions before turning his gaze to the scroll in hand. Let's see here. He mumbled, reading over the contents. So looks like we got a group of missing nin, lead by Shinga, taking captives from Tsukigakure. Looks like you've got a tricky one there, kid. The sage said before handing Naruto back the scroll. What, you're not gonna help me? Nah, I think you can handle it. That Shinga guy's a Junin though, isn't he? Naruto asked, still skeptical. Yeah, it'll be a good test of your skills. Remember to read up on his abilities as well. You don't want to go into the battle unprepared. The sage advised. Where even is Tsukigakure? Naruto questioned, re-examining the scroll. Don't worry about that Gaki, I'll taking you there. But you'll still have to do the mission by yourself. Cool, when do we leave, sensei? First thing in the morning. Now go get your shit together, it's a long way. Jiraiya said, prompting the blonde to run back out of the bar with a shit-eating grin on his face, allowing the old man to enjoy his sake, and the ladies. Alright kid, this is where we part ways. Jiraiya said as he stopped on a tree branch near Tsukigakure. What, you're not coming in, Ero-sensei? Naruto asked innocently. Nope, from here on you're on your own. Now the scroll states you're to meet the daughter of the leader of Tsukigakure at the Tsukikage Tower. One Sakino, I believe. She'll brief you on the finer details. Hi, Naruto shouted, saluting jokingly. I'll see you later, sensei. He said before dashing off in the general direction of the hidden village. Dumb Brad didn't even ask me where the bloody village is. Jiraiya laughed to himself, shaking his head. It was 3 hours later when Naruto finally arrived in Tsukigakure. Naruto had, inevitably, gotten lost, causing a mere 30-minute walk to turn into the 180-minute trek. Walking through the village, Naruto realized it was a lot like Konoha, however smaller, with regards to the atmosphere, and especially so since it was now 9 p.m. and street lamps lit the streets, but people were still coming to and fro. What shocked the young Jinchuriki the most, however, were the stares he was getting. Being the host for the Kyuubi, Naruto had become accustomed to harsh glares and being treated as if he didn't exist, but this was something else entirely. People were smiling at him. They were smiling and waving at him and wishing him a good evening. He couldn't believe it. It was almost as if he'd fallen into a dream where he'd finally won the respect of the Konoha citizens and they'd learned to love him. It was everything he'd ever dreamt of. Returning the kind gestures with vigor, Naruto continued his way through the low-lit streets until he reached a large building, his mood heightened by the townsfolk dramatically. Noticing the crest of the moon carved onto the front of the structure, Naruto entered and walked into what seemed like a lobby. Excuse me, miss. My name's Naruto Uzumaki and I've been called here to speak with Sakino Urasama? Naruto asked the receptionist at the lobby desk, remembering his honorifics, causing her to look up from her book. I take it you're the ninja Konoha sent us? She asked, eyeing Naruto from top to bottom. Hi, you sure? She questioned the blonde again skeptically. Yes, why? You don't look like much, she said bluntly, causing Naruto to sigh and lower his head as an aura of gloom settled around him. Ma, whatever, you can go on up. Sakino-sama was expecting you a while ago. After asking where she could be found and trudging off, Naruto followed the directions the receptionist gave him until he reached a set of large wooden double doors. He knocked hesitantly on the door, not quite sure what to do. Anyo, hello. It's the ninja from Konohagakure. The blonde called just loud enough for the person on the other side to hear. The sound of someone mumbling to themselves and shuffling came from beyond the door before a soft voice called for him to enter. Naruto slowly opened the door and stepped inside the room, closing it behind him. He stole a quick glance around the room and noticed it simply looked like a smaller version of the Hokage's office, minus the view. Drawing his eyes away from the interior design, Naruto met the gaze of the person behind the desk, only for his breath to catch in his throat. Sat behind the desk was one of the most beautiful women Naruto had ever seen, despite her only being a year or two older than him. She had long white hair tied up in a high ponytail using a clip shaped like two crescent moons, tanned skin slightly darker than his own, a pair of stunning emerald eyes and a yellow jewel on her forehead that reminded him of his Ba-chan. She wore a light turquoise battle kimono with a black chest plate strapped over, two yellow crescent moons displayed on the front and an orange sash around her waist. Sakino-sama? Naruto managed, after regaining his composure. Hi. You're the shinobi Konoha sent? She questioned, not looking up from the paperwork on the desk. Hi, Uzumaki Naruto at your service. The blonde replied enthusiastically, causing the young heiress to look up at him. Excellent, oh yes. I need to brief you on your mission, she said, looking slightly flustered. Naruto could have sworn he saw the tiniest of blushes form across her tanned cheeks, however it was gone almost as soon as it came. The girl then began rummaging through the stacked paperwork piled up on her desk, inadvertently spilling pieces as she searched. On the outside, Naruto merely raised an eyebrow at the girl's behavior. On the inside, however, he was giggling to himself. Hee, she looks cute all flustered like that. Ah, here it is, she exclaimed, holding up a piece of paperwork triumphantly. So I assume you've been informed of the basics? Hi, good, now for the details. Around 2 months ago, ninja from my village started going missing. At first we thought they'd simply been killed in action or had defected. However, after the 11th ninja went missing 2 weeks ago, we started to investigate. It turns out that a ninja by the name of Shinga, originally from Konoha, has been abducting our nin using some form of unknown genjutsu. We don't know how he's controlling them or what his plans are, but we have reports stating that those very same ninja that went missing have been seen in numerous surrounding towns and villages committing all sorts of heinous crimes. To put it simply, I want him stopped, and we don't have the manpower to handle such a task right now. So that's where you come into play, she said in a diplomatic tone, contrasting her previous flustered self. Naruto couldn't help but be impressed at the business-like approach she was adopting, as she was around the same age as him. Although, his curiosity was raised however by her use of my when referencing the village. It was if she owned it or something. Well, to start with, the genjutsu you mentioned that Shinga used, it is actually the result of a forbidden dojutsu called the Jibakugen, self-bondage eye. The genjutsu can be initiated via eye contact and allows the caster to manipulate the target by bringing out and playing on their subconscious negative and hateful emotions. Naruto remarked, also adopting a business-like tone. You sure know your stuff, Sakino said with a smirk. I do my homework, the blonde replied with a smirk of his own. Anyway, I've assigned you a room at a local hotel so you can stay the night there. I'll meet you at the village gates tomorrow at 8 a.m. she said with a small grin. Thanks, I'll take my leave then, Sakino-sama, Naruto said with a slight bow of the head. Sakino is fine, Naruto-san. I've never been one for formalities, the white-haired girl said with a bright smile. That's good because neither have I, Naruto responded merrily with a smile of his own, walking towards the door before stopping. I'll see you tomorrow morning then, Sakino-chan, the blonde said with a wink, before exiting the room, not noticing the blush that glazed the young heiress's face. Morning, Sakino-chan, Naruto greeted cheerily as he approached the girl at the village gates. Ah, good morning, Naruto-san, you're right on time, she replied with a wide smile, causing Naruto to frown. You can't tell me to be formal then, san, to me named Sakino-chan, that's not fair. The blonde remarked with a mocking pout. Oh, I'm sorry, she said, lowering her head. Naruto-kun. Naruto offered a goofy grin and walked up next to the young teen. So you here to see me off? He asked innocently. What? No, I'm coming with you. Sakino replied as if the answer was obvious. I can't let you come with me. You're the daughter of the leader of this village. If you get hurt, I'm done for. The Uzumaki exclaimed dramatically. Firstly, I'll have you know that I am the leader of this village ever since my father passed away a year ago, and secondly, those are my ninja out there, so I'm going to bringing them back. She responded with an angry pout, puffing her cheeks out slightly. Naruto would have thought she looked cute when angry if he wasn't riddled with guilt. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know. He managed lamely, glancing at his feet. It's okay, I suppose, Sakino said, her anger lessening slightly, followed by an abrupt silence. So I take it you're trained in ninja arts? Of course I am. Just checking, geez. Another awkward silence ensued as both teens stood tensely at the village gates, not quite knowing what to do or say next. So we should probably get going. Naruto began. Yes, I suppose we should. The newly acclaimed village leader said before abruptly leaping off into the nearby trees, surprising the young blonde who immediately followed. After 5 minutes of silent tree-hopping, Naruto finally decided to speak up. So where are we heading? He asked. To Shinga's camp. It's meant to be situated south of Tsukigakure and it should take a couple of hours to get there. The Sakino said without looking at the teen. You know, I really am sorry about your father. I didn't mean to bring up bad memories. Naruto spoke sincerely, once again penetrating the silence. I forgive you, Naruto-kun. I shouldn't have snapped at you. It's just I've been tense around Tsuki with the whole Shinga business and I'm not entirely over my father's passing. She replied in a quiet voice, strained by the sound of the wind rushing by, offering the blonde a small smile. What was he like? Naruto asked suddenly. Sakino gave a wistful sigh which made the Jinchuriki worry that he may have upset her before she spoke. He was a great man. I loved him with every inch of my heart. She said. He didn't act like the leader of the village most of the time though. He was almost like a big kid. I remember when as a child we would play hide and seek together, and he would always let me win. Naruto felt a pang in his heart as he heard the young girl speak, however quickly dismissed it. He didn't want to burden the girl with his worries. What about your mother? He questioned, a little more hesitantly. My mother died giving birth to me, so I never met her. Father would always say how alike we were though. She responded solemnly. Noticing Naruto cringe, she quickly added, don't feel about asking, it's fine, really. It's actually quite nice to talk about these things. Lately I've been feeling kind of lonely? Naruto suggested, his voice soft. Yeah, I understand, he replied simply, earning a curious glance from the white-haired girl. While the statement itself seemed like a mere heartfelt sentiment, the flash of something that crossed the blonde's face seemed to say otherwise. However, she couldn't quite figure out quite what. It gets better, you know, Naruto said out of the blue, snapping the girl out of her thoughts. What does? She inquired. The pain, he replied shortly, his voice quiet and somber. He looked up at Sakino, making eye contact for a second, his deep cerulean eyes meeting her glistening emerald, causing her to gasp slightly. Don't give in to it, Sakino-chan. Someone so beautiful doesn't belong in the darkness. He then increased his speed, leaping ahead of the shocked girl. And that was when it hit her. She knew what he meant when he made that simple remark just moments ago. He knew the pain. He knew loneliness. The duo traveled in silence for the rest of the journey, Sakino not quite knowing what to say to the enigmatic blonde. Eventually, the teen village head realized they were approaching Shinga's camp. Naruto-kun, we should stop here, we're near the camp, she said, unsure of how to communicate with the boy. Naruto made no visual or verbal response that he had heard. Sakino, however, stopped and dropped down from the clearing nonetheless. The girl followed hastily and watched as the Uzumaki sat against the base of a tree and took a long drink from his water canteen. Sighing, the girl did the same, and perched herself against a tree opposite the blonde. Tsuki-no-chan? Naruto started, breaking the girl from her musings to see the boy fidgeting with his hands and looked rather uncomfortable. I'm sorry about earlier. I don't know what came over me. He mumbled sheepishly. It's okay, Naruto-kun. Are you sure you're alright? She asked, offering the blonde a small smile. Yeah, don't worry about it, Sakino-chan. I think I just didn't get enough sleep last night. He replied with a wide grin that stretched his whiskers and a hearty laugh. The girl looked at him skeptically, but relented nonetheless, begrudgingly satisfied with his answer. So what's the plan? Naruto asked. Well, first, how about you tell me what you can do so I can come up with a strategy? Sakino replied with smile. Oh, okay. The blonde began enthusiastically. Well, my favorite jutsu is the Kage Bunshin, and I'm capable of produce large numbers of them. I know 3 elemental jutsu, 2 being offensive wind types and the other a defensive earth type. I'm reasonable at kenjutsu, have a pretty good understanding of fuinjutsu, and also have a special form of chakra manipulation which is a secret. Naruto finished before waving his arms about theatrically. Oh, forgot. I can also summon toads and can perform the Rasengan, an A-rank jutsu invented by the fourth himself. Me and my sensei are the only ones that know it. Those are some pretty important things to forget. The girl thought dryly as she watched Naruto nod to himself smugly. What can you do, Sakino-chan? The blonde asked, with a slight tilt to his head. Let's see. I'm proficient at genjutsu and in fuinjutsu, and also have quite a good knowledge of medicinal herbs. She said, tapping her chin with thought. That's perfect. Naruto exclaimed, shocking the white-haired girl. What do you mean? It's obvious. You can be the support and I'll be the muscle, he said, seemingly proud of himself. Naruto-kun, that's obvious, but what we need is… Wait, I'm not done. He interrupted before continuing, I've got it all figured out. This is what we'll do. The man yawned as he sat perched on a branch. He was wearing standard shinobi gear with a forehead protector with a moon engraved upon the front. His facial features were ordinary except the strange, dark red markings underneath his eyes. Today had been pretty boring. But then again, what did he expect? Guard duty was always the same. Nothing ever happened. I mean, who would be stupid enough to cross Shinga-sama anyway? As that thought crossed his mind, a flash of yellow in his left peripheral vision made him snap his eyes in the direction only to meet a pair of bright blue eyes. Yo, they said. Huh? Was the only response he managed before his world went dark. That was easy. Naruto commented blandly, as he stared up at the form of Sakino behind the unconscious man. I believe this is Sawasaki-san. He's a low-level chunin, I think. The girl in question said, looking down at the man before running through a series of hand seals and slamming her hand down onto the man. Sealing art. Chakra sealing technique. She shouted as a seal spread briefly over his prone form before fading into nothing. Did you get your clones in place? Sakino asked. Hi. Good, let's get moving. As she said this, the same thing happened to approximately 4 more of Shinga's captives who were also on guard duty, by the hands of Naruto's clones. Slowly the couple approached a clearing which housed around 10 tents. On the opposite side of said clearing was a small cliff face which housed a cave. Naruto assumed that was where Shinga would be. They both crouched on branches and watched as a few of the other captives went about their business as if they were at home. Suddenly, the outline of a figure began to form in the entrance of the cave, and from it came a tall man with a mane of white hair, placed into 2 ponytails either side of his head that fell past his shoulders and onto his chest. He also wore a strange black mask that covered all of his face except his mouth and had red markings on. Naruto recognized him immediately. Shit, he cursed. What is it? Sakino whispered, a worried expression on her face. That guy there, like Shinga, is an ex-Konoha shinobi. I think he was an Anbu even. His name is Hikui. He's at least Chunin level. Naruto explained in a low tone before another figure emerged from the cave. He strolled with his hands behind his back and wore a similar mask to the first. He wore an elaborate green sleeveless one-piece suit with matching armguards, cloak and a green sombrero? No, that couldn't have been a sombrero, right? No shinobi wore sombreros, except, shit. Once again cursing his luck, Naruto turned his head back to Sakino. We just got more trouble. That guy in green is also an ex-Anbu Konoha missing nin. His name's Doshin, I think. The blonde commented, furthering the girl's worry. What do you know of their abilities? She asked shakily. Hikui uses some form of technique similar to opening the 8 gates, however from what I've heard it doesn't last long, and Doshin uses some kind of earth jutsu to transform himself, increasing power. But again, this has drawbacks for the user. Naruto recited, silently thanking Ero Sanin for making him revise the bingo books, especially the Konoha missing nins. What do we do? The village leader asked. Nothing. What? We do nothing, we follow the plan. All it means is that it'll be a bit harder to execute. He stated, his voice firm. So the two waited. They watched as the two missing nin sat by the fire, the Doshin character looking suspiciously lax while Hikui looked tensed and coiled as if ready to strike at any moment. Suddenly, or at least for the missing nin anyway, feathers began falling from the sky. While the majority of the ninja noticed the genjutsu, some of the less aware and or weaker foes didn't and were put to sleep. Targeting those that had fallen asleep, a dozen Naruto clones then jumped out of the surrounding forestry, and bashed them over the head, ensuring that they couldn't be released from the genjutsu and rejoin the fight. Naruto and Sakino watched as the remaining 4 captive nin and 2 ex-Anbu engaged the clones. Despite outnumbering them, the clones slowly began being dispersed by the Rouge Shinobi, causing Naruto to frown from his crouched spot. I'm going to join in, stay here and provide support, Naruto said sternly. Before he could go, however, Sakino gripped his shirt arm. Stay safe, Naruto-kun, she whispered, causing the young blonde to give her a bright smile. Don't worry, Sakino-chan, I'm gonna be Hokage, I won't die here, he said before dashing off. Joining the fight, Naruto managed to take one of the remaining captive nin by surprise, reducing the number to 3. Bringing his hands up into his favorite seal, he created another 24 clones to engage the 3 Tsuki shinobi while he stared down the Konoha nin. Uluki here, Hikui-kun. We got ourselves a little Konoha brat. Aren't we lucky? The one called Doshin exclaimed gaily. You know I don't believe in luck, Doshin-san, and even if I did begin to conform to such a ridiculous concept, I don't see how this situation would be deemed lucky. Hikui stated blandly, causing Naruto to sweep drop. He's like Shino but worse. Mo, you're no fun, Hikui-kun. Doshin whined before moving his head slightly as a kunai whizzed past him, eager to begin. Well, don't expect me to hold back because I plan on going all out from the start. Hikui, stay out of this, the kid's mine, he shouted before running through a sequence of hand seals, Kinjutsu, Mud Golem. With that, mud and earth began to lift off the ground and attach itself to man until his 5 feet 8 inches frame became 6 feet 9 inches and took the form of a sort of weird, golem thing. The man wasted no time before shooting off towards the blonde Jinchuriki and throwing a punch which Naruto dodged by rolling away. Turning his head, he blanched at the sight of a small crater that had formed where the man's punch had hit. Shit, he's almost as bad as Ba-chan, Naruto thought worriedly before eyeing up the man golem thing. My ninjutsu won't work. I'm not entirely confident that I can cut through that Amur. I could use a Rasengan, but it would need to be an Odama version, and I'm not sure this guy will give me enough time to form one. Thinking quickly, Naruto ran through some hand seals while jumping backwards to avoid another of Doshin's punches before slamming his hands on the ground. Summoning jutsu, he shouted, causing an eruption of smoke to cover him and the immediate area. As the smoke cleared, Naruto could be seen standing upon a large toad that was orange with blue markings all over. It also wore battle armor that covered its chest, back, shoulders and forearms. Yo Gamma, I'm gonna need your help to stop this rock guy, Naruto shouted down to the toad. Very well, Naruto-kun, I will do my best, it replied in a calm tone, to which the blonde grinned wildly. Ooh, look at this, the kid can summon toads. My, this just keeps getting better, Doshin shouted excitedly in a strange deep guttural voice. He then leapt into the air, bringing both hands clasped together behind his head and brought them down onto the blonde. Unflinching, the blonde made no attempt to move as Gamma brought his armored arms up into a cross, blocking the Rouge Nin's attack. Naruto did notice, however, that the toad buckled slightly under the force. Cursing himself for getting, he jumped off the toad, ordering it to engage the missing nin before making a dozen shadow clones to help. Naruto then gripped his right wrist with his left hand and watched as the telltale swirl of chakra began to form in the palm of his right hand. The clones were quickly being dispelled by the earth golem, and Gamma was only just holding his own, only managing to get a few hits in. However, they didn't seem to do much. Noticing this, one of the remaining clones formed a plan. Oi Gamma, you think you can give us some oil? It said before it, and 2 other clones, seemingly understanding the other's thought process, jumped onto Gamma's head. I certainly can, the toad replied as it inhaled before spitting out a large stream of oil. Reacting quickly, the clones threw kunai with explosive notes attached into the stream before igniting them, causing a large fireball to barrel its way to the earthen shinobi. Not having the capacity due to the extra weight to move, the nin placed both arms in front of him protectively before he was engulfed by the inferno. Naruto watched on from a distance with a smile on his face before looking to his hand and noting that the once small swirl of chakra had finally reached a large enough size to get through Doshin's armor. Dashing forward, the blonde sped towards the golem as the fire cleared, revealing the ex-Anbu to be frozen almost due to the hardened mud. Before he could reach the shinobi, however, Hikui appeared in front of Golem with an unhappy look on his face. Naruto slowed slightly, however his brow etched itself into a frown as the white-haired man's eyes seemed to glaze over as if he was spacing out. Grinning, he realized Sakino must have placed a genjutsu on the nen. Not wanting to waste the opportunity, Naruto increased his speed, sidestepping the dazed shinobi and thrusted the spiraling sphere of chakra into Doshin's stomach. A throaty roar came from both the missing nen and Naruto in pain and exertion as the ball of chakra grinded its way through the hardened mud and into the man's flesh before the young Uzumaki released the ball, sending Doshin flying back, crashing through multiple trees. Naruto sighed as he jumped back next to Gamma as the toad dispersed in a plume of smoke, cautious to get some distance between him and the now angry Hikui. "You will pay for this," he said, his voice cold and uncaring. I'm not sure I will," Naruto replied cheekily, trying to shake the sick feeling that settled in his stomach. "Prepare yourself, for you shall die for crossing." Hikui was interrupted then by a feminine shout. "Naruto-kun, look out," cried the frantic voice of Sakino, before a sharp pain spawned from his lower back, causing him to cry out, stumbling a couple of steps forward. He reached with his hand to touch the affected area and saw it was covered in blood. His blood. Cursing to himself, Naruto leapt clumsily to the side on reflex, turning his gaze from Hikui to see a tall man with dark gray hair which spiked out in every direction, even more so than Naruto's, and wore a black cloak. Under his eyes and between his eyebrows on his forehead were strange dark red markings that seemed to writhe occasionally. But what made Naruto gasp was the sight of Sakino. Or what he thought was Sakino anyway. The girl was wearing the exact same thing and had the same hair. However, a strange, pitch-black mask covered her face, only revealing her lips, and her eyes shone like two white bulbs. In her hands, she clutched a bloody tanto. "T. Sakino-chan?" the blonde managed. "Naruto-kun, I can't control myself, it's Shinga," the girl cried in defense. "Looks like you got quite a lot on your hands, Shinobi-kun," said Shinga, a sneer plastered on his face. "Now, how about you and Sakino-chan here have a dance?" He then raised his hands into the tiger seal, causing the markings on his face writhe furiously. Naruto watched in horror as Sakino's form then began to twitch and move, almost robotically, as she raised the tanto in front of her into a stance. "Please, Naruto-kun, help me," she whimpered slightly. The blonde surveyed the clearing, taking in the tensed and battle-ready form of Hikui, the smirking form of Shinga, and the crying Sakino. Only one thought went through his mind. "Shit. That's all for now. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments.